Okay, enough of bookmarks. We're done with that. Let's watch, oh god, I hope I don't get bad. Let's watch something fun. Resident Evil related. So, this is Jay's reviews. I subbed to him a long time ago for his Mega Man content.
You know,
Mega Man X content specifically. And he goes through each game in autistic detail, which is crazy. So now he's doing Resident Evil timeline.
The interesting fact about the Resident Evil games is that in its 30 years of existence, it has been a single continuity that has never been rebooted or anything like that. The Chris Redfield you follow in Resident Evil 1 is the same one from Resident Evil 8, which came out almost 30 years later. Not many legacy franchises with a lot of plot and dialogue can say that. In many cases, keeping the story fresh and the characters young is something that often requires a reboot, when we've seen the cast of the RE games age over the decades. Originally, I wanted to do a large Resident Evil timeline video, but those are difficult to make, so I opted not to. Instead, I wanted to talk about my observations related to the lore of RE. All this being kicked off by something I noticed about the new RE9 and thought it was a nerdy nitpick best saved for a nerdy nitpick video, instead of being something I would go into during a review. Where what matters most is the game.
He also did TMNT in 2003, banger videos. I never watched those. I mainly watched his Mega Man, and I think he did Sonic as well. I was a lot younger when I used to watch his vids.
Game itself in a big picture sort of way. The thing I'm talking about is what the marketing for Resident Evil Requiem revolved around. How Leon is back and he's going to have to return to Raccoon City and relive the nightmare that started his involvement in the fight against Bioterror in RE2, by going back to the RPD. But that premise only got me to think of one thing. Return to Raccoon City? Return to the RPD? Isn't it, like, destroyed? I mean, Resident Evil 3 ended with the bomb scene where they paid homage to that nuke scene in Terminator 2 by showing Raccoon City blow up in extreme detail.
Yeah.
That's it. Umbrella's going down.
And now we have a rather unfortunate turn of events. It seems that the President and the Federal Council have passed judgment over the civilians of Raccoon City. The President and Federal Council have ruled that the Bacillus Terminate operation is the best course of action for this extreme situation, and have since executed. Based on that fact, Raccoon City has been literally wiped off the map. Current reports have the death toll surpassing the 100,000 mark. Our hearts go out to those poor civilians of Raccoon City.
Looking at it again makes it crystal clear. That city literally does not exist anymore, and then the opening scene of the animated movie Resident Evil Degeneration also confirms that.
Can you see that area behind me beneath the red tinted sky? That is what's left of Raccoon City after the military fired a missile at it.
If this is indeed the case, then there's little hope of finding any survivors among the city's 100,000 inhabitants.
So while playing RE9, I'm not going to dismiss the plot because of this inconsistency. As I said in the last video, I thought the plot was pretty good for the most part.
It is an inconsistency, but it is reasonable to assume there would be some ruins due to building structures. If you know anything about carpentry or how buildings used to be made, or anything about fallout shelters, it's pretty reasonable to assume some of these buildings would still be standing. Definitely damaged, but not complete. Like, it's hard to explain without getting super technical, but it makes sense that there's ruins. Let's just say that. What doesn't make sense is that there's no radiation. Unless they use a non-radiation nuke. If that even exists. I don't even know if it exists.
I'm instead going to use this video as a chance to go over various things about the lore of RE that don't add up. But keep this fact with the ending of RE3 and the premise of RE9 in your brain, as I'm going to circle back to it later and argue that it may very well be possible that the Resident Evil series currently exists in 2 different timelines, even though that was never the intention of the people who made it. But like I said, I'm going to run through the series and point out various nerdy things a hardcore fan would notice and then circle back.
If it's a hydrogen bomb, maybe? I don't know much about hydrogen bombs, but I know that certain buildings were created to withstand potential nuclear fallout.
Back to RE9. But before I even think about it, the greatest continuity conundrum in the Resident Evil series is actually that it's established in RE4 that Leon doesn't smoke. But poor Chris, here in RE8, we can see that he does. I thought it was important to help Chris curb this bad habit, so I decided to partner up with Fume to be the sponsor of today's video. Fume is a flavored air device designed to help people quit vaping and smoking by breaking the hand-to-mouth pattern.
No, I don't skip the ads because, it would be disrespectful to the content creator.
It's functional and fashionable. No nicotine or vapor in sight, just a weighted, twisty, fidget-friendly tool that gives your hands something better to reach for when cravings show up. Now, I've never been a smoker myself, but I can speak from experience on the fact that habit is one of the hardest things to break, and a tool to aid in breaking the cycle is very useful, which is something Fume would be great for if smoking is your vice of choice.
Yeah, it wasn't
I got
a
the crisp mint flavor and thought it was really good.
I see.
If you're ready to break the habit, now's a great time to try Fume. Right now, when you grab a Journey pack, you get a free Fume Topper, which is a soft and chewable mouthpiece, just for using my code JReviews. Grab this offer while it's available, so head to tryfume.com, and that's tryfum.com, and use code JReviews to get your free Fume Topper with your Journey pack. Now, hopefully, Chris can kick those bad habits to the curb. Thanks again to Fume for sponsoring the video. Now, back to regularly scheduled programming. Did you ever notice that Resident Evil 1 doesn't really have a canon story? When it was a standalone game, it didn't really matter. You played as either Chris or Jill and experienced the story as them. In Chris's story, he teams up with Rebecca Chambers from the STARS Bravo team to escape the deadly mansion and rescues Jill from a...
If you go back and watch any videos on the crazy development cycle of Resident Evil 1, this game should have been a failure. This should have never been as good as it was, but it was a massive success. This game was a huge gamble back then for multiple reasons, but they pulled it off and they created a legacy franchise.
Cell in the lab, and at the end, the 3 escape on the chopper. In Jill's story, she and Barry Burton work together and rescue Chris from the lab at the end and then escape. Hope Rebecca found a way out before getting caught in the blast. But then, in Resident Evil 2, we're told that Chris, Jill, Rebecca, and Barry all escaped the mansion together and tried to get the chief of police to investigate whatever Umbrella was up to under that mansion. But the explosion removed all the evidence. It's pretty easy to use your imagination and think up a way where all 4 characters get through the mansion at the end. However, that does mean when playing RE1, there is no definitive canon version of the mansion incident. What we know is that the STARS Alpha team showed up.
Because there's no way to save both Rebecca and Barry in the original.
Up to investigate. Wesker was a traitor working for Umbrella, and the whole incident was a test for the combat prowess of the Tyrant, and they all escaped and it blew up. I'm gonna say it was probably Chris who fought the Tyrant in the lab, or maybe it was both Chris and Jill working together, I don't know. Either way,
I would love them to remake RE1 to make a definitive version of this story, to kind of tie in nicely to the remakes. Without any retcons, but only like refinements, like what happened to Rebecca and Barry in their prospective scenarios.
I assume Chris was there, given the fact that Chris and Wesker have such animosity towards each other in Code Veronica and RE5. By contrast, Resident Evil 2 does have a solid canon version of the plot, despite having 2 different setups. If you play as Leon or Claire first, that determines which one of them gets to the RPD first, and then the entire story plays out differently because of that. In the game itself, it doesn't really matter which one you do. Either way, the premise is that the T-virus from the mansion has leaked into the city, causing a zombie apocalypse. But then, the series made it clear through future entries that the canon version of the story is the Claire A, Leon B version, where she gets to the station first, and then Leon gets in through the side. But then, the series made it clear through future entries that the canon version of the story is the Claire A, Leon B version, where she gets to the station first, and then Leon gets in through the side.
Really? I thought it was Leon A and Claire B. Huh.
In the game itself, I think this version of events is more narrative.
I only played this one once, years ago. The original RE2. I never beat it, because I was just not good with the tank controls.
Narratively satisfying. Like how Ada seemingly dies and Leon is distraught, but then when Leon is fighting the tyrant, she drops the rocket launcher in the room, giving Leon the belief that Ada might be alive, semi-explaining why he's not surprised when they run into each other in RE4. If you were doing Leon A, Claire B, she's the one who Ada gives the rocket launcher to, when Claire and Ada never met in the story. I also think it's more narratively
Oh, that's true. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because they never met. Why would she give her the rocket launcher? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Satisfying in Claire A, because in this version of the story, the main monster, Dr. Birkin, is trying to infect Sherry with the G virus, and Claire tries to protect her and needs to synthesize the vaccine for it in the lab.
That's true.
It creates a tense climax with real emotional stakes. In the Claire B version, Sherry never gets infected at all, removing this from the plot entirely. Anyway, Resident Evil 6 makes Claire A, Leon B definitively canon because in it, Sherry's much older and has healing factor, and she explains to Jake that it was because of the G-virus infection and how Leon and Claire saved her and got her the vaccine, that she now has certain abilities as a result of it. So that just means the version of events where Claire...
They did remake RE1? Yes, they did. I mean, like, using a re-engine remake. A Reach for the Moon engine. Like Resident Evil 2, 3, Requiem. Like that. I mean, like, a new remake. And I heard they're making one. Which they don't have to do, but I would like to see it because Resident Evil 1 is special. You know, it's very special.
has to make a vaccine,
and I would like to see us return to it again.
She asks Leon to go get Sherry from where she was left. To meet up at the train to administer the vaccine was the true version of the story. Resident Evil 3 also has multiple ending variations, but it doesn't matter as much which one you end up seeing in the game, because all of them feature the president deciding to blow up Raccoon City to stop the T-virus from leaking into the rest of the country. And then the series was so big at that point that there was a bunch of spin-offs in development. Resident Evil Gaiden for the Game Boy Color was the first definitively non-canon entry in the series because Leon is a member of an anti-Umbrella group post-RE2, and in the end he possibly dies and is replaced by a BOW shapeshifter. That's not canon because as early as the RE3 epilogue, Leon is being recruited by the US government and is definitely still his original.
I would love more interim games to kind of explain what happens in between that are canon, you know? I would love them, a Leon training simulator of some kind before RE4. I would love seeing Chris go to Europe to learn more about Umbrella before Code Veronica. I would like to see a lot more of those interim stories. I would like to see the STARS crew return to Raccoon City after the mansion incident and confronting the police chief. I would like to see more of that.
Itself in RE4 and onward, not a BOW clone, so this game is not relevant to the series story at all. But then we got games like Resident Evil Survivor, which are canon, but mostly because of how nothing in the story is contradicted by anything else. It's a side game starring a new character sent to an island by Leon and needs to fight his way through a bunch of BOWs, but has very little bearing on the series story. But then, like I said, it gets to be canon because there's nothing to say that it isn't. And then more side games we made that were definitely canon, like the RE Outbreak games on PS2, which took place during the Raccoon City destruction arc from RE2 and 3. At first, these games were canon for much the same reason as RE Survivor, but then the main character of RE9, Grace Ashcroft, is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, a reporter from RE Outbreak who escaped the city before it blew up. She returns much older in RE9, making the Outbreak games now kind of a core part of the story.
Your birthday's in 2 days? Happy birthday, Ivory. Early birthday, I guess. Happy birthday, man.
In the early 2000s, gaming tech...
Just keep in mind, you're gonna be 1 year older to death.
Technology evolved so much that relatively recent games like Resident Evil 1 could be reimagined from the ground up and feel totally different. But I also feel like RE1's remake was made early enough in the series that it more or less replaces the original game in the canon. It helps that remake, as it's called, was directed by Shinji Mikami, who directed the PS1 original. So the remake is much more like how he'd want the game to be, if they had the technology and experience.
It held up really well. It looks so good. Even with the pre-rendered images, it looks really good. But I would still like to see another one.
PS1 original. So the remake is much more like how we'd want the game to be if they had the technology and experience in 1996 that they had in 2002.
It also fixed a lot of the voice acting issues and the dialogue. Because in RE1, had a lot of cheesy B-movie dialogue. Wow, what a mansion. Stop, don't open that door. Chris? Stop it. You were almost a Jill sandwich. Stuff like that. And that kind of stuff, it's stupid, it's silly and cheesy, but it has a certain charm to it that I would like to see referenced in another remake somehow. It's just a little, just the acknowledgement of that bad dialogue.
Nothing from the original story isn't in remake, which will be relevant when we get to the newer ones. So therefore, the remake of RE1 can neatly slide itself into the canon of the series, in place of the extremely campy and incredibly unserious original game. If any of the RE remakes could replace the original version in the story, it would be this one. However, I still think RE1 is worth experiencing as a piece of gaming history on its own.
Yes, I agree. I feel like remakes are never meant to replace an original. Hang on a minute. Remakes don't exist to replace original pieces of art. They're just there to refine the story and make it easier for people to access. Like, for instance, I don't like the idea of making games for a modern audience. I do like the idea of making games more accessible for everyone. Like the classic Resident Evil games, I would never tell anyone to go play them because of the 10 controls. But I would tell people to at least watch them on YouTube, cutscenes, and the gameplay if they were interested, to see how it compares to the quote-unquote definitive version of the game. And also, I don't want those games to become lost media because, you know, like you said, it's gaming history. And learning about where the series started is always, in my opinion, it's more fascinating than the series itself. So I wouldn't want anyone to miss out on that.
It has enough of its own gameplay content that makes it different from the remake, which would give you a better appreciation of the remake when you see sections that sucked in the original that got improved, like the shark sequence in the guardhouse. But anyway, as far as the mansion incident is concerned, this is a pretty definitive telling over the original. Though it still doesn't come with an ending where all 4 characters escape at once, and it also removed the iconic Jill sandwich line.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
But I only bring that up because that's referenced in RE Revelations 2.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Oh.
It's very tough.
I never
heard that story.
I never played Revelations 2. I never played Revelations 1 either. I don't know why, I just never touched them. No particular reason, it's just... I just never got them.
But you can chalk that up to simply being a mythology gag, not proof of the original game being canon over the remake. Then, things the remake added to the story, like Lisa Trevor, the experimental daughter of the...
What they do to children in this series is so beyond fucked up. And every time I see this character, I'm just like, oh my god, that's awful.
The remake. Then, things the remake added to the story, like Lisa Trevor, the experimental daughter of the man who built the mansion, appears in other canon material, which would suggest that RE1 is replaced by the remake in the story. Remake also got a prequel game called RE0, which sucks if you ask me, but the story gave more background info on Rebecca and Umbrella and the connection between Wesker and Birkin. I think it's pretty skippable from a story perspective though. I didn't think anything in Zero felt like the saga needed it, and it was also odd given how it shows Rebecca fighting monsters with an abundance.
That's not true, because the villain in Zero was the whole reason why the mansion incident started in the first place. The leeches he spread. Well, actually, not the mansion incident. The reason why Bravo team. It explains what happened to Bravo team before Resident Evil 1. Though it does leave a little continuity error because Rebecca never mentions anything about it in the original RE1. Like, she goes through that entire scenario on the train in the Umbrella lab underground and says nothing about it. So that's something that they could probably fix down the line.
Of weapons just hours before appearing in RE1, where she teams up with Chris and mentions absolutely none of that. The RE series lore got really complicated with the release of RE4. When this game was being made, it was decided that zombies and Umbrella were getting old, so they just scrapped those from the start of the game. In Leon's opening narration, it's established that Umbrella went out of business because their stock plummeted after the whole, deadly zombie virus leaking into a city that got blown up thing. They don't teach that at business school, but that specific kind of PR hit will sink a company fast. That's not to say it doesn't make any sense, but that was always a huge anticlimax given how many of the previous games ended on the note of needing to take out Umbrella, like RE2, 3, and Code Veronica back to back to back.
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
That's it. Umbrella's going down.
But it's not over yet. There's still something we've got to do.
You mean?
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now, let's finish this once and for all!
Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished.
From there, RE4 was a very self-contained story starring the now elite government agent Leon that is on a mission to rescue the president's daughter from a cult. RE4 was far less about the ongoing story and more about a cool setup for an action game where they overhaul the series' gameplay. It is still undeniably a follow-up, just a very self-contained one, which will be relevant later. The game introduces parasitic enemies infected by Las Plagas to replace zombies, which becomes a central part of conflict in RE5 and the movie Resident Evil Vendetta. But like I said, that opening monologue changed the entire status quo of the series in just a few sentences. So we got a whole game that filled in the blanks. Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles was an on-rails shooter game which retold the events of RE0, Remake, and RE3. It's funny how Umbrella Chronicles does give us a version of the mansion incident where Chris and Jill are teamed up for the entire mission.
Hi, CEO Dr. Fitfies. How's it going? Good to see you here. Thanks for joining the stream.
Honestly, because of that, you could make the case that this is the most canon version of RE1's story, since the mansion incident is the inciting moment for both Chris and Jill, but as presented in the original game and its remake, they couldn't both have done it. But then, they still didn't take this chance to make the version where all four characters escape at the end, but the first new story segment of Umbrella Chronicles was the mission where you played as Wesker escaping the mansion and killing Lisa Trevor before the manor blew up, connecting the dots between his death in RE1 and his superpowered return in Code Veronica. The last level of Umbrella Chronicles was the Fall of Umbrella, where the company put everything it had into one last monster project that Chris and Jill arrived to shut down and destroy, which was the final nail that led to the company's demise that was spoken of in RE4, giving a slightly more climactic end for Umbrella than nothing at all. Umbrella Chronicles got a sequel called The Dark Side Chronicles, which featured retellings of Resident Evil 2, Code Veronica, and a new section called Operation Javier. RE4 also just dropped in this character called Jack Krauser, who was Leon's mentor when he became a government agent, but he had never appeared before, so the drama felt a little forced. But Operation Javier showed them on a mission together to give the two a little bit more backstory. The retelling of RE2 also put Leon and Claire together for most of the mission while still having all the plot beats like Leon's connection to Ada and Claire with Sherry, while making Leon even more connected to Sherry than he was in the original game though. Again, arguably making this version feel more canon than the original. I'm not saying that it is, just that it makes the character relationships feel more fleshed out. Dark Side Chronicles giving us this scene where Leon is given an ultimatum by the government. He'll either work for them or they'll experiment on Sherry to test her G-virus antibodies. So Leon takes the job, showing the transition from him in RE2 to RE4. In the next several years of the series, we get the animated movies giving us more adventures with Leon and Claire and Chris and the gang.
I know everybody hates these movies. I like them. Well, some of them. Not all of them. Some of them are retarded and don't deserve to exist, but there's a few that I actually really like.
Basically all of them focus on Leon, though. Jill and Claire also getting the revelations.
Of course, like this one. This one is where the meme came from. No way. I can't say the word.
Games to give gang. Basically all of them focus on Leon, though. Jill and Claire also getting the Revelations games to give us more screen time with them. But in a way, RE5 and 6 kind of feel like the climax of the series. Umbrella was dead as of RE4, and then RE5 comes out and shows us what the
RE5 and 6 was supposed to be like, or rather RE6 was supposed to be like the Avengers level finale for the entire series, in a sense. Before, I guess, moving on to different characters in different stories. But RE6 was such a massive, confusing mess of a game that it killed Resident Evil for a few years. I think it came out in 2013. I think. Let's see, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, we didn't get Resident Evil 7 until 2018, I think.
End of Umbrella has meant for the fight against bioterror. As more viruses and other BOWs
the combat in those movies go crazy. Yeah, they do.
Still going to be made with or without Umbrella.
Cheesy, but I
should have seen it coming. It didn't take long after the fall of the Umbrella Corporation for their bioweapons to end up in the hands of terrorists.
This is when Chris got jacked and started punching boulders. I love the campiness and the lore of Resident Evil. I don't know what it is. It's just, it always fascinated me. None of it makes sense, and a lot of it's forced, but it's just, there's something charming about the lore.
Era of bioterrorism descended upon vulnerable countries, shifting the balance of power throughout the region.
RE5 gives you more backstory on Umbrella and then wraps up with a Chris versus Wesker plot that was ongoing since the first game. Credit to the Resident Evil series, RE5 is almost 20 years old, and Wesker has stayed dead ever since then, despite being a super iconic character.
Well, Suno.
And side note, I wrote most of this before RE9 came out, and when Suno showed up and had like Wesker-esque powers, I was like,
Wesker? He's still alive?
But it's like a clone or something, I don't know. Anyway, but
I'm so pissed off of what they did. We didn't even get a chance to fight him. No boss fight at all. That was so dumb. He was just a wasted character. Because we ended up fighting Victor at the end. Such a wasted villain. Absolutely no purpose to the story at all, other than to resemble Wesker slightly.
RE6, the franchise had so many characters and plot lines that it reached critical mass.
Yeah, now we have Wesker at home. Suno will never beat Daddy Wesker. No, he will not. And if you guys saw my playthrough, you know how mad I was, how annoyed that we didn't even fight him.
The game had 4 stories and 7 main characters you play as. More drama between Leon and Ada, giving Chris an alcoholic arc, Sherry's now a government agent, Jake is the powerful son of Wesker who's got an axe to grind with Chris for killing his father. Lots and lots and lots of drama. But you can respect RE6 because it clearly wants to be a big epic game with lots of fan service concepts, like giving us a fight scene.
Yes, and it almost did it well. But it's like when you first saw RE6, it's really good. The first few hours are good for whatever character you choose. But halfway through each story arc, it just becomes a mess. A huge mess. There's a boss battle with Leon and Ada where a guy turns into a dinosaur. A zombie dinosaur. I kid you not. That's literally what happens. And then there's bioterrorism happening all over the world at the same time. It's literally Armageddon. And yet, all the characters treat it like it's a Tuesday, like an Avengers level hero villain of the week type thing. It's so weird. It's tonally inconsistent. It's just it does a lot of things I don't really like. And it pissed me off because this was the first time in a game where we had all these iconic characters together. And they fumbled it hard. Also, Jill wasn't in the game, which pissed me off too.
between Leon and Chris. But it felt very trope-heavy, contrived, and ultimately predictable. Like the part where Chris says he wants to pass the torch to Piers at the end of this.
That part. Not the rest of the game was dumb. And this guy was such a waste of, like, the part of the characters is such a waste. Except for Sherry, of course.
Story. In that exact moment, I was like, oh, okay, Piers is a dead man walking. And what do you know? He dies not long after. And it had so many plot threads that doesn't even have a cohesive ending either. Like, Chris is chasing after Ada in this game, but he was chasing after a fake Ada, and when she dies, he tells Leon about it, only for Leon to rescue
and apparently Ada was a clone. Or the Ada Chris is after is a clone of the actual Ada Wong. But Ada doesn't care about it. And she's just like, whatever. Chris mistakes the real Ada for the clone, tries to kill her. Leon protects it. It's a whole
one mid-fight not long after that. And then you never...
And I hate to say this, I hate this argument, because I love anime. But this story was too anime for its own good. For Resident Evil standards. It just became super trope-heavy, and it messed with the lore. I feel like they can do this again, but in a more focused way. We've seen how good they handled two characters at once in our Resident Evil 9 with Grace and Leon. I feel like they can do the same thing in Resident Evil 10 or whatever game that comes next.
Find out if Chris even knows the truth about this or not. The point is, by RE6, you could tell that despite what I feel were good intentions with the story and characters, the franchise reached this boiling point where it was too complicated and had too many interwoven conspiracies and conflicting character motivations and action scenes and all that crap. Capcom agreed, because 5 years later, Resident Evil 7 came out and it was nothing like anything that came before. It returned the gameplay to the simple survival horror like the early games, but from this first-person perspective, the games had never done.
I really don't like RE7. It's too scary. Like they say, I mean, that was the point. But even Capcom admitted it was too scary. That's why they toned it down a bit in RE8 and gave us big, tall vampire goth mommy.
Before. But the plot is the biggest thing to notice here. RE7's tone is much different than the rest of the series. The first RE had a kind of an Evil Dead vibe, and then it kind of felt like The Shining with the setting and atmosphere, but the series became much more of an action movie with each entry, especially once RE4 came out. RE7 goes for a much scarier, more personal vibe to the horror, which complements the gameplay perspective. I'm not trying to say RE7 is grimdark or anything,
wuss.
I mean...
What are you calling a wuss?
Jack Baker and all the other boss characters are quite insane in this game, but the game does not focus on an elite agent. You're just a dude trapped in a psycho monster house in the middle of Louisiana looking for your lost wife who is presumed dead. Playing as a guy who has no backstory or anything and no combat training makes the game scarier for sure, but I also think the entire game, in hindsight, feels very much like a soft reboot. You know, one of those sequels that doesn't really require any past knowledge to get into. You won't even really know if RE7 is a sequel or not until Chris Redfield shows up at the end.
Exactly.
Just disregard
on Redfield. Looks nothing like Chris.
The fact that he looks nothing like any previous version of Chris. It's the same guy.
Exactly.
RE7 is in the same universe as all the previous games. It just takes place a few years after RE6, and now the threat is mold monsters. RE1 through 6 are canon to the world of RE7. However, as I said, the tone feels so different from those games because the characters take themselves so much more.
There's no mention of any, from what I remember of RE7, there was no mention of any of the multiple bioterrorism attacks that happened around the world. One was in China, the other was in New York, I think, and another city. Several cities got outbreaks at the same time in RE6, but there was no mention of it. It was like everything was fixed, I guess.
Seriously, that RE7 kind of feels like a dividing line in the series. New tone, new characters, new threats, etc. RE8 does give us more Umbrella backstory by the end, but it still more or less is a sequel to RE7 only, and its DLC episode takes place in the future and resolves the winter storyline that RE7 and 8 were about. But to circle back to the point at the beginning of the video where I said I feel like the series now has two timelines, that's because of the recent remakes. Not simply because these games follow the more simple tone of RE7, but because of the way they're written, they can't be canon at the same time as the original games. As stated, the original remake didn't leave any gameplay or story on the cutting room floor. The plot of RE2 Remake hits pretty much all the major beats it needed to, and some moments and characters feeling enhanced in dramatic weight, but others felt very undercooked. For example, Leon and Claire never speak to each other between the opening and the ending, when they were working together throughout the original story via radio. So then, it feels like a weird continuity error when Sherry talks about Leon.
Yeah, that's something I didn't like about the RE2 remake. Same goes for RE3 remake and RE4. They changed a lot of the little stuff. Like there was no radioing back at all with any of the characters. It felt like there was no interconnectivity like there was in the older games.
And Claire saving her in RE2, when in the remake, Leon doesn't even meet Sherry until the danger is basically almost over. That's more of a subjective point, but I think the story loses something by arranging it like that. It's a fundamental detail that makes it feel totally different. Leon also has no idea Ada survived by the end of the game. She still drops him the rocket launcher, but not from an angle where he'd be able to see her or hear her. So then the remake of RE4 makes it a reveal to Leon that she's still alive. I still think this is a perfectly good enough retelling of the original RE2, but has enough differences to where I can't say it's the same story exactly. I don't think you can slide this game to the canon like you could the remake of RE1. But then, the RE3 remake, it really is RE3 in name only. It features Jill and Carlos fighting Nemesis in Raccoon City before it gets blown up, and there's a part
where... This was such a disappointing entry. RE3 was... Jill's was one of my favorite characters, and they ruined RE3.
Jill gets infected, and there's a villain named Nikolai, but it's a totally different sequence of events with character motivations and personalities that don't feel like the original game much at all. I don't mind it in a vacuum. I thought the story of the RE3 remake was pretty good, but this game just didn't care that much about being a great remake of the original game, and that's pretty unfortunate. Capcom basically sees all the remakes as replacements for the originals, when, like I said, the plots feel so different in the newer versions, I don't really think they can easily be that, especially on a gameplay front like RE3. At least 2 and 4 felt like they were getting the idea of the original game across. RE3's remake is just reused assets and set pieces with almost none of the qualities and levels that made RE3 what it was. But despite being the most faithful gameplay remake of the three, it's actually RE4 remake which makes the most narrative changes. Everything you remember from the original is in the remake, but now it's a much more serious take on the concept of RE4 instead of being an attempt at a campy action movie.
And I really don't like that. I'm sorry, I really didn't like RE4 either. In terms of tone, the storytelling, it just didn't hit the same as the original.
I think both takes do what they want to do well, but then RE4 Remake features changes like how in this version, Krauser kidnapped Ashley like he did in the original, but in 2005, the reason was that he was working for Wesker and needed a way to gain Sadler's trust. Ada and Krauser were both working for Wesker and had conflict between each other as a result. But then, the remake simplified the story to where Krauser was just a guy working for Sadler and had nothing to do with Wesker. It's only Ada working for Wesker in the new version. And then Wesker, instead of being this kind of campy villain, seems more sinister in the remake.
And
but we are supposed
voice acting changes too. Ada and Wesker both absolutely awful casting decisions.
Believe that the guy running on walls in Code Veronica and becoming a super mutant in RE5 is the same guy as the RE4 remake. And it just doesn't really watch like that. So, to me, I think RE7 begins a new version of the Resident Evil timeline where the world and characters feel more serious. In a sense, everything in the new timeline before RE7 is the same. Everything that was canon to the OG world still is in the RE7 world, but, pending remake. Like, Code Veronica and its plot as is tentatively canon, but when the remake inevitably comes out, its story and the changes made to it will be canon to the new timeline, and the OG Code Veronica will just be canon to the original timeline that ends at RE6, if that makes sense. On one hand, Resident Evil is definitely not meant to be that deep, but they're also trying to plug in holes that don't make sense all the time. There's this meme of how many characters got infected with the Forever Hot and Young virus, but it was exactly stated in a social media post around the release of the film Resident Evil Death Island that Jill's infection with the T virus in RE3 slows down her physical aging.
Hey, whatever works, right? That doesn't explain how her hair turned back to brunette. Because wait, Death Island was after RE5, right? I think so. I think it was after RE5. Because she became she got hypnotized by Wesker after she died and came back to life with the virus that he implanted in her. But her hair turned blonde, and I think her eyes turned blue. Maybe they were always blue. I can't remember, but yeah, she switched up immediately, and she's still.
So therefore, she looks the same in 2015 as she did in the new remake version of 1999. I don't even know why they bothered explaining that at all, when the reason is obviously because it was just cheaper for the movie to reuse contemporary models that already existed.
No, the reason is because she's attractive the way she is, and people like the way she looks. That's the reason.
Point being that I'm obsessing over small details in the Resident Evil universe, not because I'm upset with the games, but because Capcom has created the precedent that I'm allowed to, because some of these inconsistencies have a silly in-universe reason. Moral of the story is that when you look at it like this, RE7 created a new timeline where everything that happened was the same as before, just more serious. Technically, we never see Raccoon City get atomized up close in the 2020 RE3 like we did in the 1999 version. So if Remake 3 is the new RE3, it actually isn't that much of a contradiction in RE9 when the city is still standing, because what kind of missile it was and how much damage it did wasn't really specified in the remake timeline. And even with a new timeline to make things simpler, it still doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, in RE8, it's just casually dropped in that the BSAA are up to no good now, and I was super confused by that when RE8 came out, because I was like, wait.
That was one thing I was so mad about. They just, at the very end of the game, Chris says the BSAA are using zombies now. They're sending zombie soldiers to all these places. Like they're going against their core value by using BOWs. Even in RE7, it was Chris was working for a company called Blue Umbrella. I still don't really know the significance of that, or if they're even still part of it. It's weird. Chris joins a new organization every entry.
I thought they were the good guys that Chris was working for. So when the name BSAA came up in RE9, I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be good, bad, or neutral. I guess more good than not, given the fact that Timo Wesker kills them all, but still very confusing. Speaking of confusing, though, Timo Wesker himself was an odd thing in RE9. I had no idea what his deal was, and then he just dies in cutscene.
Yeah, he was part of the Connections, the organization that Ethan's wife was part of in RE7. But like you said, he just dies like nothing.
Before we even learn anything about him. I said in my RE9 review that I thought the Connections being the villains ruling over everything felt really contrived, given how it tries to tie everything from the series together, from the Raccoon City missile having a hidden purpose we didn't know, to them causing the president's death in RE6. But then I was told that it was explained in the RE7 DLC where you play as Chris that the Connections was who Lucas Baker was working with all along, and I'm like, hot damn, there's just so many things. It becomes word salad at a certain point. And then the order of the games they're making confuses it as well, as we're evidently getting the Code Veronica remake next, and then later an RE1 remake, which takes place before CV, obviously. We already got the RE3 remake, which is a sequel to the RE1 remake that has yet to be made as well. It's just kind of a mess, and I'm pretty positive that there are now just two timelines of RE. In RE9, my point is really confirmed because Leon goes back to the RPD and gets flashbacks to the events of the RE2 remake, which, as I said, couldn't coexist with the original. The RPD is the one from the remake as well. I don't think Capcom gives that much of a shit, but just to keep highlighting tiny things that don't really add up, in the remake timeline, clearly Leon A, Claire B is the canon version of RE2 because...
One thing I do love about Jay's reviews is that he will always overanalyze everything in every version of a game that comes out and point out story inconsistencies like this. And he did this with, I think, with Mega Man, and I watched it.
Leon has memories of Marvin that haunt him in RE4 remake.
To this day, Capcom has not connected Mega Man Classic with Mega Man X at all. We still have a game that bridges the timeline. Even though every version of Mega Man is one timeline, except for the Battle Network games. But every robot versus human storyline is one timeline.
And 9, which only happens in Leon A. That doesn't change too much though, because the B scenario in the remake was lame as shit anyway, so Sherry gets infected in both versions. Although speaking of Sherry, you might be thinking, doesn't Sherry's appearance in RE9 follow up from RE6 with the same actress and everything? And good question. RE6, like I said, is still canon, pending remake. The RE6 remake will be sure to rewrite things to make them the most sense for this version of the story. But again, I'm not here to say these stories are horrible garbage. I'm only making a video like this because I like the series so much and have a lot to say about it. But the ongoing saga just doesn't make any sense no matter how much I enjoy following it. But it is all nerdy.
Exactly. That's my sentiment. I enjoy following it. I love this lore. It's so fascinating. But it doesn't make any sense. Like, let's be real.
Picks. RE9 is still probably going to be my game of the year because it was awesome and everyone should go play it if you haven't already. Though I don't know why you'd be watching this video if you hadn't, really so go figure that out, man. In the meantime, that's about all the time we got for today. So I'll close by saying the same thing I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Also, thanks again to Fume for sponsoring this video. With that said, you've seen everything. Go outside.
Yeah, that was really good. We're already 2 hours in? Jesus. You know what? After this, we'll play Baldur's Gate. I just want to see this AI video of RE9 first. It looks so good. This is why I love AI. Hotel manager. Oh yeah. Turning into a zombie. Better not be Leon. Oh, there he is. He's still too young. She's still too young. Vic is extra creepy. Wow, this looks so good. Oh my god. The girl. Smash her pass. No. Who's that? That's not Grace. Oh, that's the doctor. The nurse, I mean. Jesus Christ. This is scarier than the actual game. Oh my god. It's very... I mean, it's supposed to look like a... It's supposed to look like an 80s, horror movie version of it. And it's doing a good job, but it unironically looks scarier than the actual game. Oh god. Oh my god, that is scary. Suno. What a waste of a character. I hope we get some Ada Wong DLC. I really do. I need to see her. And Jill. I need to see everybody. I'm gonna see the whole cast come back. Tiring. That if this was a movie, it'd be a really cool one. Yeah. I mean, you can literally make this with AI. It looks just like an 80s film. Is my wife. What else is there? Is that it? I don't want a jump scare. Okay. That was weird. That was it. Okay. Yeah, that's cool though. Soraverse. It was I think you made it with Sora, but Sora's shutting down soon. It could shut down at any moment. They didn't give us a date. Yeah, that's cool. We're gonna continue with Baldur's Gate.